Welcome to the seventh season of the Combustion Chronicles podcast, where bold leaders combine with big ideas to make life better for all of us. I'm your host, Shawn Nason, CEO and founder of Mofi. As a maverick-minded, human-obsessed experience evangelist, I believe the only way to build a sustainable and thriving business is to put people first. Throughout this season, we'll be connecting you, the listener, with cutting-edge leaders in the experience world who are challenging old ways of thinking with bold new ideas and a commitment to human-centric design. Experience matters, people matter, and revenue matters. That's why it's time to ignite a people-first experience revolution. My guest today, Robin Daniels, has spent more than 20 years in marketing and growth leadership roles at such companies as Salesforce, Box, LinkedIn, Matterport, and WeWork. He's a three-time chief marketing officer and a veteran of 2.5 IPOs, and he now serves as an advisor to fast-growth companies around the world. His areas of expertise, and there are many, include growth strategy, product marketing, communications and media, organizational design, leadership development, innovation management, mergers and acquisitions, leadership, category creation, brand building, and sales transformation. And to top it all off, he freely shares his expertise with his 29,000 followers on LinkedIn. Welcome to the Combustion Chronicles, Robin.
Hey, Shawn, thanks for having me. First of all, I'm really excited to be here. I'm a big fan of yours and everything you write, and I just love your style and your insight. So thanks for having me. And second, that's quite the bio.
Yeah, I was like,
so
yeah,
let's get into
I love it. And even right now, you're focused on one of those talents. You're traveling, and I so appreciate you making time for us. Hey, I have to start this conversation, though, asking you something. How do you get involved in 2.5 IPOs? I've never heard of a half of an IPO. So can you shed some light on that?
There's a first for everything. Not every experience is a resounding success. So basically, in the last 20 years, I was based in Silicon Valley and I worked for a lot of great tech companies. Some of you never heard of because they crashed and burned. And luckily, some you have heard of because they did quite well. Salesforce, Box, LinkedIn, and so on. But the first IPO was with Box. I was not the CMO there. I reported into the CMO, but helped take them public. When I came in, we were maybe 200 people and we scaled to probably just over 1,000 people in an IPO. Super fun, great experience. And I really got to see what it took to take a company public, even though, again, I was not the CMO at that point in time. Then the second time that it became my turn, I was at WeWork. And of course, I came in right as WeWork was scaling and growing and preparing for an IPO. And then unfortunately, it all came crashing down. So it never happened. But man, we were close. I still have photos on my phone from my trip to the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange as we were kind of preparing for our IPO, thinking about where does our branding go? What kind of party are we going to have? So it's weird, being that close and then having it all kind of fall apart just kind of a week or two later. So that was both exciting, but also honestly a little bit brutal. And then my next company, Matterport, I was the CMO there. Luckily, I did manage to take them public, sooner than I thought we were going to go. Actually, I thought it was going to be a little bit longer of a journey, maybe 2 or 3 years. But because of the tailwinds that we saw from COVID and other things executing well, we ended up going public about a year later. So it's super interesting being back at NASDAQ probably about 2 years after I was there with WeWork and then getting a second go at it. And actually this time having it succeed, even though I don't feel like it's my responsibility that WeWork failed. I'm sure I could have done some things better, but there were a lot of factors that went to that. It was still a point of redemption for me to be back at NASDAQ with Matterport, pressing that button, having that IPO moment. It was really fun, and it was something I will cherish for the rest of my life. So that's my 2.5 IPOs for you.
I love it. It's funny because I think I have a half of an IPO, but it's the other direction. In 2017, I actually worked for an organization where we took the company from being public back to private.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To do a turnaround. And that was very interesting. So I'm actually looking forward to sometime in my life to be in an IPO standing there. So thanks for sharing those experiences. And, Robin, we read in your bio is so rich and the things you've done is so powerful. And, The work that I do and our company Mophie does, where we focus around the experience ecosystem. And, your bio doesn't talk specifically about experience, but experience is baked in so much
Hmm.
of what you do and
Yes.
how you act and who you are as a person. And it's really central to everything. So customer is huge for us at
Hmm.
Mophie.
Hmm.
And as a marketing person, once a company converts a prospect,
Hmm.
how can they ensure that the customer experience is good from the very start?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, it's imperative that even though you're in marketing, that you need to really experience the end-to-end process. I think a lot of marketers, unfortunately, once they get into their job, they're quite far removed from the product experience, which means that you're sitting there and you're maybe creating content, you're creating supposedly training sequences or sign up sequences or whatever it is based on maybe things that don't have any grounding in reality. So I think, one of the things I learned early on in my career when I was a product marketing manager back in 2000 and 2001 is really getting to know the product super well. And of course, in product marketing, you tend to do that, but it really behooves everybody else in marketing to also know the product super well. The best marketers I've known, whether they're CMO or maybe they're VP of strategy or growth or whatever it is, they also take the time to learn the product and stay with it, because once you have a full understanding of the product itself, then you can really focus on, well, how do you take friction out of every step of making somebody excited about that product experience? Because really what it comes down to at the end of the day is, I think of it as this way: there's friction at every step of the journey for a customer. Sometimes the friction is in the way you market, meaning, is it clear enough what it is you're trying to sell to somebody? Well, that's a friction point. If it's not clear enough, people will never get what it is that you're trying to sell. That's something you can take out of it. Then, of course, once somebody has actually gotten interested in what it is that you do, then they maybe go to your website. And if that's not clear enough, well, maybe that's a friction point. Once they go to your website and they want to sign up, and if the sign up form is not even, that's a small thing, but it's a tactical thing, but it's so important. If the sign up form is not clear or too kludgy, that's a friction point. Then once you're in the product and your first experience, if that's not easy enough, that's a friction point. And then once you're in the product and you've kind of gotten used to it, it's the UX, simple and clear. Can you share it? Can blah, 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 whatever you need to do. And so at each stage of this journey, there's a lot of friction points. And I think the best marketing and the best kind of customer experience is about how do you remove that at every step of the way. And of course, that's a combination of product, customer experience, customer success, marketing, even sales, because again, friction at any points of that process can really kind of break everything down. And I learned that, especially, I would say, at Salesforce was a company I think did it really well in the early days. And we were competing against very large vendors such as Oracle, Siebel, Microsoft, SAP, companies who had way more resources, way more people, way bigger teams. And the way we came in and we said, we are a different kind of company to do business with. Those kind of companies, they would sell you a solution, a CRM solution. And once you've bought it, honestly, they didn't really care whether or not you used it or not. Back then it was called shelfware.
Yeah.
And because it was just like, you'd buy something and you spend millions of dollars. And then once it's purchased, it's kind of like, we don't care. But Salesforce came in with a radically different business model, of course, but it's also a way of driving customer experience, because we said, we're a different kind of business to work with. We only succeed if you're happy. We only succeed if you actually use the product, and you can use as much as you want or as little as you want, scale up or down. And it instantly changed the conversation for us to be much more focused on their experience, not our experience. All the other vendors were focused on what's in it for me. And Salesforce came out and said, what's in it for you? We're going to take that other tack. And it really instantly changed the conversation. And we were seen as a company that was much friendlier to do business with. And of course, now we take it for granted. Every company has a SaaS model, and they model some way or another what Salesforce did, maybe even doing it better now. But I think they were really pioneers in kind of flipping the script on what customer experience was all about.
Yeah, and that's a powerful story, because I remember when Salesforce came out, it was early on in my career as well. And I actually just moving into corporate, and I thought, this will never work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And now they're the model that everyone went after. And I love your perspective that you just gave us around the end-to-end process. I think that's a powerful nugget that we sound so simple, but yet we still, so many leaders, and you work with tons of leaders, Robin, all over the world as well, that they struggle with that. So I love that you are keyed into that and working with that. And I want to talk though some about often people take some long journeys to get into experience work, and none of us started out thinking we would work in experience, right? But you literally took a really long journey. Yeah. You moved from Denmark to the Silicon Valley without a job or even a
Yep.
place to live. Could you tell us about that journey and what went into that leads you to what you do now? And really it is, I still say that you do a ton of experience work. The industry may not classify it that way, but I definitely look at it that way. So can you share a little bit about that journey?
For sure. I've never wanted to be led by fear, and I've always wanted to be inspired in what I do and ideally have some impact and some positive impact on the world. And I saw just back in the 90s just the advent of technology and how it was changing the world for the better. At least I still think it has for the most part, and it can still do so. And so I always wanted to be part of that revolution. So I moved from Denmark. You're right. I didn't have a job or a place to stay. I never been. I didn't know a single person, but I never wanted to look back on my life and say I was too scared to do it. I had the opportunity to go in a magical time. And I always thought, well, if I don't make it, what's the worst that can happen? I can go back to Denmark. It's not going anywhere. Go back and stay with my family. They're still there. And so I always was driven by more the potential of what could be than the fear of just like staying stale. So I moved over and I applied to every job I could find online. It was mostly through Craigslist. And there were some real random companies I was talking to at that point in time. And it's interesting, Shawn. Yeah, Craigslist. Yeah. You know what? It's still around and the UX has not changed at all. It's
At
kind
all.
of mind-boggling. So I applied to every job I could find. I have this list, actually. I still have it. I think I spoke to close to 20 companies. And you know what? Salesforce was on that list, actually. I spoke to, but I remember I was 21 at the time. I felt it was so boring. Like, CRM system, are you kidding me? Ugh. But anyway, so I ended up speaking to a lot of companies and I ended up getting 2 job offers at the end of those kind of job interviews because everybody was hiring. And I ended up getting hired, and I was hired as a web programmer. I was working for this VP of marketing to really design the website, manage it, and so on. But I was working a lot with the engineering team and the product team on taking whatever they were building and kind of translating into something that was compelling in the website. And my boss said to me, she said, "Hey, Robin, you're okay with this programming stuff, but you're really much better with like positioning and messaging. You should be in product marketing." And I was like, "What's that?" I have no idea what product marketing is. And so I still credit her to this day with like seeing something in me and taking me under her wing and kind of giving me the start that led to the rest of my career. But to your question also, yeah, I think my whole journey then, if you take it from that point, going into product marketing, and then of course growing my career through the various companies, experience has always been a part of it. I think of it as the best marketing in the world is really about providing these magical moments that surprise and delight. And of course, marketing oftentimes is really at the top of the funnel when it comes to like somebody becoming aware of who you are and what you do, but also then, of course, leading you through to actually becoming a customer. But we also, of course, have a huge impact on the rest of that experience. And some of these companies I've worked for, they've all been in different industries, different sizes. I've worked for companies, like Salesforce that grew from 1,000 to 8,000 people, Box from 200 to 1,000 people, Vera from 8 people to 120 and getting acquired and so on. But so much of my journey has been trying to really put something out there in the world that makes it easy for people to understand and fall in love with what we do. I think of it this way. I really have a simple mission if I had to distill it at the end of the day. And it comes down to 3 things. Number 1 is I have to create a brand that people fall in love with. Number 2, I have to generate meaningful revenue impact. And number 3, I have to be a good collaborator to all the key teams in the business. And that's sales, that's of course customer success, it's the product team, you name it. But when it comes to the first one, awareness, building a brand that people fall in love with, I think there are 3 stages to doing that. Number 1 is you have to make people aware that you exist. That's kind of obvious. So a lot of brands, they nail that. Number 2, you have to make people understand what you do. And number 3, you have to figure out how to make them fall in love with you. And that's a combination, that last one, of marketing, product, sales, engineering, customer success, you name it. Think about how many brands are out there where you know they exist. Yep. You understand what they do, but do you really love them? Let's just take an obvious one that's easy to rail on, the airline industry, right? Okay, United, you know what they do. Would you say that everybody loves United? Probably not, right?
Nah, I'm a Delta person, so
right?
no.
Exactly, it's like Delta. But even I'm sure, Delta say like, they're not perfect either, right? Because
No.
they all have their issues. But the point stays the same. So many of these companies out there, they think if long as we get people aware of who we are, we've done the job. No, that's just the first phase. You also have to make people, of course, understand what you do, of course. But the last one is really hard to nail. And that is, so again, showing up, consistently taking the friction out of it, surprising and delighting, being easy to work with. It's not just about the product, but also being an easy partner to work with. That's part of customer experience. Like the Salesforce example I gave you, there's so much to it that companies forget about. I'll tell you, if I may share a story.
Absolutely.
I had a experience with an airline this summer. So I was going across Europe with my family, and then we were going to end up in London, and we were going to go back from London to Copenhagen for 2 days, and then we're going to come back from Copenhagen to Colorado for a wedding. We're going to fly through London. So we're going to fly back to through Europe to London, then back to Copenhagen for 2 days, and back to London, and back over to Colorado. But there was a strike going on. And I'm like, well, let's not risk it by going back to Copenhagen and then coming back 2 days later. Let's just pack enough and just stay 2 extra days in London. Okay. So I can call the airline up and I say to him, hey, we're not going to fly from Copenhagen because of a strike. Let's just fly direct. We'll just start our journey from London. So basically just cutting out one leg of the journey from Copenhagen to London. And they said, well, you're changing the journey. It's going to cost you $1,000 a person. I'm like, we're not changing it. We're taking out one leg of it. We're actually saving you because we're taking out one less flight for 3 people. No, you're changing the routing. But I'm like, I want to be in the same flight from London to Colorado. It's the exact same. It's just I don't want to go from Copenhagen. No, it's going to cost you. I said, well, what if I just don't show up for the Copenhagen to London flight? They said, no, then we'll cancel your trip. We'll cancel your trip. And I just thought to myself, here I am. I'm basically held hostage. It's all about them. It's not customer centric in any way. They didn't give a shit about really my experience. It's all about, can they make money and can they follow the rules, right? And it was just like, it's a classic example of being non-customer centric. And I guess it was, again, one of these eye-opening moments when I thought to myself, let me make sure that never happens to any of the companies that I work with or work for.
Well, and I think that the thing about that is what you said earlier, what's in it for me versus what's in it for you as a customer, right? And that is, I've had that same situation several times. I'm like, no, like let's just remove a leg. And they're like, no. And now the price is adjusted and it's going to cost more money. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, this is not.
Exactly.
So
it completely, like,
it's asinine.
It's asinine. It's so antiquated, and it's all about them. And it just kind of infuriated me. I'm like, and I like fly a lot, so I'm like one of these, frequent flyers, elite flyers, and they could care less. And I'm just like, well, if that's how you treat me, how are you going to treat everybody else? It's just insane.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I love it. So I want to ask you a question about a trend, because there was actually an article recently that came out in Forbes. It said the 5 biggest business trends in 2023. Everyone must get ready for now. That was the title. Number 1 was accelerated digital transformation. Number 2 was inflation and supply chain security. 3, sustainability. The 4th, the talent challenge, which a lot of us have talked about. But this was amazing to me. In this article, as one of the 5 trends, they said immersive customer experience. And they talked very specifically about the metaverse and what the metaverse is happening. But more importantly, there's actually a quote in here that says, the trend towards experience is so strong that brands like Adobe and Adweek are appointing chief experience officers to ensure that it is made a fundamental element of business strategy. And so one of the things that I have kind of been on a soapbox about is moving from experience management. So let's even say from CRMs, experience management, to experience as a strategy, right? How do you think that is going to impact people because I also just went to a conference recently where people are saying the emergence of CMOs and chief experience officers are going to start to become one. And what are your thoughts about this trend? Like, it's hot. There was another article I read this week too about the biggest C-suite role being hired right now is chief experience officers. And, I remember the days when it was chief innovation officers. So what are your thoughts about that trend happening, especially from a chief marketing officer, where they're saying these roles are going to come together.
It makes perfect sense when you put it like that. I had not read that article, or maybe it feels like I might have, but it makes perfect sense when you think about it, because experience is such a part of creating a brand that people fall in love with, like I just said, but also creating very strong word of mouth. And the best marketing engine you can create, of course, is word of mouth. But I think, if I think about one of my favorite people in this kind of space who thinks about, strategy and business a lot, Simon Sinek. He always says start with why. I'm sure you've seen his videos, read his books, and so on. Most
Oh
people
yeah,
have at
the
this
five
point,
whys.
right? Exactly. But to your like what you just said, people want more immersive experiences. That's the what. But why is it that they want that? A lot of times I think we get straight into the what is it that we're trying to solve. Oh, what we need to do is we need to increase our NPS, or we need to increase people using our product. Why? Why is that important? So to the immersive experiences, okay, so we know people want it, but why are we really what are we trying to solve for? Why are we doing it in the first place? Is because we lack human connection? It's because people are feeling lonely? Do they want to feel closer to each other? Is it part of community? Is it part of being closer to a company? Is it part of experiencing the world in a new way? Why are we doing this? And I think it comes back to getting very clear. You can easily jump into trying to solve for the what without having a clear why. And I think a lot of times we end up going wrong. And I'm here in London, actually. I'm working with Beamery, one of my favorite companies, kind of a talent management lifecycle platform. And I love what they do. And I love the team here. They're about 400 people or so, very focused on building a great company that stands the test of time. And one of the things I'm working with them on is a leadership course that will help develop their leaders, both their leadership level and also the management level, to really unlock the potential of everyone. And a lot of what we're talking about in this course is starting with clarity about what you're trying to do. All the other things will kind of fall into place if you have clarity. Don't get me wrong, all the other stuff is hard too, but if you don't have clarity from the beginning about what you're trying to do, like a clear why, you'll be miles off in your execution. You might have the wrong team, you might execute the wrong strategy, and so on. So much of it, I think, comes back to starting that way. So in terms of also your question around this chief experience officer and the CMO, are they both going to live together? Are they going to merge? Depends on probably the kind of organization, would be my guess. And again, I'm just thinking out loud. I think maybe if you're in a B2B organization, they might be two separate things, because I think the sales cycles and the channels are so maybe different. But in a consumer org, B2C, they might merge more. Again, just because the velocity of how you're actually getting customers onboarded is very different, of course, than if you have a 12-month or 24-month sales cycle. Maybe they'll merge over time in the B2B world, but I think it's probably going to be a little bit, because I see the chief experience officer maybe as somebody who's working adjacently with the chief marketing officer on creating that. But again, I'm just kind of pontificating a little bit here.
No, I think it's fascinating because I see more and more articles every week around this whole space. And so one of the things that I have come to love about you, Robin, is you seem to have a mindset just like ours. And at Mofi, we talk about being maverick minded and human obsessed. And recently you shared a line on LinkedIn that I loved. And you said there will always be tough moments in any job, and it's usually the relationships that will get you through it. Which we wrote a book during the pandemic called Kiss Your Dragons, where we talked about radical relationships. So how can organizations help those relationships develop? I know you just talked a little bit about it, but especially in a remote first environment right now where we see that happening.
Yeah, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it or lie. I worry about how that works in a remote first world. It's not impossible, but it's certainly harder. I mean, every single leader I talk to says kind of the same thing. And it's one of those things that's not really popular to say, because everyone's kind of like, the public conversation is very much around remote first is so awesome. We're more productive. We're more happy. We have more freedom there, which I think is a lot of truth to. Don't get me wrong. I love also the freedom to work remotely when I choose to. But it's very hard sometimes to build that strong cultural bond, the trust sometimes. I'll give you just an example from my own personal experience, probably the best one to relate to. In the nearly 2 years I was with Matterport, we grew the business a lot. We went through a pandemic. We scaled, took the company public, had to hire people. We had to let people go. The whole time, I never met anybody in my team in person. And it was damn hard to build those
Wow.
bonds of trust build those bonds of camaraderie and feel like you're like really in this together. And I think we made it work, but I would probably estimate, because we were remote 100%, it probably took 3 or 4 times longer than it normally did. So for example, I had some people on my team who were very close, but I could tell there was a little bit of natural like skepticism about each other when we came in. You have to kind of find your way. But we made it work, but it took probably a good 6 to 9 months versus what maybe would have taken 2 or 3 months normally, when you kind of go for a walk, go have lunch together, get dinner, get to know each other, talk about your family. The problem a little bit was some of this remote technologies, it comes a little stilted. I think,
Yeah.
it's a little hard to read body language. As a leader, one of your powers, if you're a good leader, I think, is to read somebody's expressions and emotions and body language to kind of see how comfortable they are, and then get them to try to open up so you can actually motivate them to do great work. And that's just harder. There's no doubt about it over remote work. I think, when you're doing one-on-ones, it's probably okay. But when you're in a team setting, you're looking at a screen of 5 or 10 people, it becomes very, very hard to do. I worry about it a little bit, but also at the same time, I don't think it's impossible. We're obviously learning to adapt. So I think the smart companies, how they solve this, they lean into it and they make it a priority. And what they do is they actually find moments to connect, maybe every 2 or 3 months, in person. 100% remote, I think, is really tough. Not impossible, because I think a lot of companies make it work, but I think it's tough. But I think if you can get people together every 2, 3, maybe 4 months, and make that time around, social activities, getting to know each other, less about the work itself. The work will take care of itself if there's a high degree of trust. And I think that way you break down some bonds that make it really much more of a delight and joy to work together, honestly. And so I think absolutely, it's these times that we live in, they're challenging for both, of course, the leader, but also for the worker, like figuring out how to read each other, how to communicate in the right way. I've said this before, both on LinkedIn and many other places. I think the number one skill that will either make you succeed or fail in business is your communication skills. And
Yeah.
so what has happened with the pandemic is suddenly we had to really radically learn how to change those communication skills or adapt them to a new way of working. Again, I think, 2 years in now, 2.5 years in, we're learning to do it fairly well, but it was hard and for a long time. So communication now, there's of course lots of digital tools, but digital tools can't always support the deeper conversations. Again, uncovering I'm having a conversation with somebody who's struggling or needs coaching, doing that over Zoom or Slack.
Yeah,
That's
it's
tough.
hard.
That's tough. Really hard. Really
It's
hard.
hard. The very first episode of this season, we had a very dear friend of ours on, Mark. He's a CEO of a company in Chicago. And what he did was they let go of their office space purposely. Instead, all the money that we were spending on rent for our office space, we will now put into having company get-togethers. So that remote first, just what you said, every 2 or 3 months, now they spend that money, bring them in for 2 or 3 days. It's not a stress on anybody. So I really love that.
It's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I see more and more companies doing that as well. And it doesn't even have to be global get-togethers. I get that's expensive. It's also probably not great for the environment if that's what we're trying to really be mindful of. It could be local get-togethers, but also, I've always noticed, and this is way even before the pandemic, in my experience, when I would be in the office, I would always notice the people who would sit by themselves at lunch and they would kind of be cut off. And I always knew that they were kind of red flags for leaving. If you don't have kind of, I would call it a circle of friends, an entourage that you hang around with, sometimes you're part of an entourage, sometimes you might be leading, it doesn't really matter. But if you don't have a group that you feel like you're part of, then your motivation to stay or maybe even do great work sometimes can be lagging. And so in this remote world, when I think there's an epidemic of loneliness, I just worry about it. But again, I also think so as a leader and as a manager and even as an employee, you have to lean into it, recognize that this exists, and then do whatever you can. Schedule, one-on-ones with as many people as you can. I know it can be exhausting, so be mindful of that, but it's a great way of just kind of talking to people, getting to know them, and sometimes force it to not be all about the work. Of course, you have to do work sometimes. That's very important, right?
Yeah.
But if it's all about
I
the
love
work,
that. It's not always.
yeah, exactly.
It's not always about that. Well,
No.
I have one last question for you,
Okay.
and that is, what advice do you have for yourself or for someone who has just started in a marketing role? And think back even 20 years ago, what would you tell, Robin 20 years ago? What one piece of advice would you give?
I would say at some point you have to really go all in. And what I mean is, if you really want to see your career take off, it doesn't happen if you just do the bare minimum. or if you just do what's expected of you. And so you have to go all in. And what does that mean? It means you find the right moment, the right opportunity, the right project, maybe the right leader who you're working for. And you say, I've been given this opportunity to work on this project, or I see an opportunity to work on something that nobody's working on. And I'm going to go all in. I'm going to fix it. Or I'm going to make it epic. And if you do that, it'll create such momentum for your life and your career that you can kind of go and maybe write your own ticket for the rest of your life, find great jobs because they will want you because you become known for something. So you have to find when you do it, what it is, and how much you want to give to yourself. You can't do it all the time because going all in, I think a lot of times can be super exhausting. Physically, mentally, it can be draining. But at some point, if you want your life to really take off, you got to do that. For me, it was at Salesforce, 2007, when I got that job. So that was already, I've been in Silicon Valley for 7 years. I'd done good work. My career was slowly rising. But at Salesforce, I was given an opportunity to lead one of their products called Chatter, and I just gave it my all. I tried to innovate as much as I could, put out epic campaigns and programs and launches, and I just worked my ass off. And it did create momentum in my life. When Box finally came and found me, after many years at Salesforce, the line that they used on me was, whatever you did at Salesforce, come do it for us at Box. And so again, if you do it well and you lean into it and you have fun doing it, it creates a lot of momentum for the rest of your life. So that's my advice. And it's not that I appreciate that I did it. Maybe I should have done it sooner. That's the only thing. Right? So if that opportunity is given to you, go for it, man. It's yeah, just go for it.
I love that advice. I would probably say the same thing. So, wow, some great stuff here today on the episode. But it has come to that time when we start to close up. And we do these things called the Combustion Questions, Robin. And they're 3 randomly selected questions from a human algorithm that I have not seen, but they were just passed on to me. And are you ready for your combustion questions?
Am I going to combust?
Well, we'll see here, buddy.
We'll see. All right, let's do it.
Do it. All right. So combustion question number 1. What's your favorite sea creature?
My favorite sea creature, I would say the seahorse.
And why?
I just think it looks like it doesn't belong in the sea. It looks so weird. And I love it.
It's kind of a maverick of its own.
It's totally kind of like one of my favorite books of all time is by Seth Godin called Purple Cow. He describes how a purple cow just stands out. And I feel like a seahorse just completely stands out. It's so odd looking. I love it.
So cool. So cool. All right. Combustion question number 2. When it comes to drinking water, do you prefer tap, bottled, or sparkling?
Bottled.
And I have to ask why on that one too.
Because it's usually colder. I like really cold water. Now, if I could get tap water really cold, I'd do that every day of the way to save the environment, because I'm trying to be as very mindful of that as possible. But I like really cold water. And a lot of times the water, at least at my home, it's kind of like lukewarm. It's not that exciting coming out. So of course, and in Denmark and in Europe, I would say in general, we don't really do the ice cube thing. In the US, yes, I had access to ice cubes whenever I wanted, but in Europe, not so much. So it means I have to chill the water it's just a big hassle. I would say bottled cold water.
Cool. Love it. All right. Last question. This one you might have to think a little bit about. What do you think about pencils?
Pencils. I'm not a big fan of pencils. I hate that you have to kind of sharpen them all the time. I mean, I guess if it's a mechanical pencil, it's okay. No, I prefer a good ink pen, I would say. Yeah, you know what? Being left-handed, which I am, I've never been a big fan of writing with my hand as much because it always smears. Okay, pencil, it doesn't smear as much, but I much prefer typing on a computer, phone. I feel like my hand is always all black or whatever color.
I feel your pain. I'm a lefty too, and it's always,
always
exactly, as I'm sitting here, my choice is a Crayola marker. So there you go. I don't know if that's any better. Well, thanks so much, Robin, for being here on the Combustion Chronicles with us. And again, as you heard in the bio, Robin is very active on LinkedIn. Go out and find him, Robin Daniels, or you can connect with me and I'll make sure you're connected to Robin. But thank you so much, sir. And I look forward to having some more conversations with you.
Sounds good. True pleasure, Shawn.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Combustion Chronicles. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few minutes to subscribe, rate, and review. Remember that I'm always looking to meet more big thinking Mavericks, so let's keep the conversation going by connecting on LinkedIn. If you want to discover more about human-obsessed, Maverick-minded experience ecosystems, go to mofi.co, where you'll find ideas and resources to help you ignite your own experience revolution. Or go to experienceevangelist.com to learn more about my mission to challenge leaders to blow up outdated, siloed systems and rebuild them with an aligned human-first approach. And as always, stay safe, be well, and keep blowing shit up.